Airports are strange places, half excitement, half stress, and completely unpredictable. For most travelers, it's about catching a flight, grabbing some overpriced snacks, and hoping your luggage doesn't end up in another country. But for me, every trip is a careful balance between managing my condition and making sure my service dog, Max, is safe and comfortable. Max isn't just a pet. He's my lifeline. A golden retriever with calm eyes and a steady presence. He helps me deal with episodes of anxiety and keeps me grounded when my world starts to spin. Without him, air travel would be impossible. People don't always understand what service animals do, but the law is very clear. Max has the right to be with me in the cabin. This particular trip was supposed to be routine. I was flying across the country to attend a legal briefing, something I'd done plenty of times before. I had booked my seat in advance, paid extra to make sure Max would have enough room, and carried all the necessary documentation just in case some airline staff didn't know the rules. Experience had taught me that not everyone respects the law, especially when it comes to service dogs. The airport was packed that morning, buzzing with travelers rolling their suitcases, families herding children, and the usual chaos at the security line. Max walked calmly at my side, ignoring the distractions. People often stopped to admire him, but I had his vest on that clearly read, "Service dog, do not disturb." Most respected it. Most. After checking in and passing security, I finally made it to the gate. That's where I first saw her. The woman who would later earn the nickname Karen in my mind. Middle-aged, dressed in a way that screamed money but without elegance, and carrying an expression like the world owed her something. She glanced at Max with narrowed eyes, immediately zeroing in on him as if his very presence offended her. At first, I brushed it off. People stare sometimes, and I've learned to ignore it. But the trouble really began when we boarded the plane. I had been assigned an aisle seat in the front section of the economy cabin. The seat next to me was empty, reserved specifically to give Max enough space to sit or lie down comfortably. It's an arrangement airlines usually make for service dogs, and it works well. I got Max settled, clipped his harness to the seat belt loop, and prepared myself for the flight. That's when Karen showed up. She stopped in the aisle, glared at me, then at Max, and finally jabbed her manicured finger toward the empty seat. "That's my seat," she snapped. I blinked, confused. "No, ma'am. This seat is reserved for my service dog. My boarding pass covers this row." Her lips curled like she'd tasted something sour. "A dog doesn't need a seat. I paid for a ticket. Move it." Her voice was loud enough to draw attention from other passengers. Max stayed calm, lying at my feet, but I could feel the tension rising. I pulled out my ticket to show her. "This row is assigned to me and my service dog. If there's a problem, you can speak with the flight attendants." She crossed her arms and huffed. "This is ridiculous. Dogs belong in cargo, not taking up space that paying customers need. I'm not sitting anywhere else. I demand this seat." By now, the aisle was blocked. People were whispering, and the flight attendant hurried over. I explained the situation, showing my paperwork and my boarding pass. The attendant nodded, completely understanding, but Karen wasn't backing down. "No," Karen barked. "I don't care what your papers say. This is discrimination against me. I have every right to sit here." I was trying to stay calm, but my patience was thinning fast. I'd dealt with ignorance before, but this woman wasn't just ignorant. She was entitled, rude, and completely unwilling to listen. The attendant tried to reason with her, but Karen kept insisting that Max should be removed. That's when I dropped the first piece of information that made her falter. "Ma'am, you need to understand something. This isn't optional. Federal law protects service animals, and if you keep causing a disturbance, the airline has the right to deny you boarding." For a moment, I thought that would shut her down. But instead, she smirked and said, "We'll see about that. You don't look disabled to me." That line hit me like a punch. The classic Karen move, deciding she could judge my condition just by looking at me. She had no idea what Max was trained to do, no idea what I lived with, and no right to question it. The flight attendant gave me an apologetic glance before stepping away to call a supervisor. Passengers were staring openly now, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen stood her ground like she owned the plane. I leaned down and petted Max, whispering, Good boy. Just stay calm. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that fate had placed her on the wrong flight that day. Because the pilot in command wasn't just any pilot. He happened to be a close friend of mine. And once he heard what was happening, everything was about to change. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. The passengers who had already settled in were craning their necks, eager to see how this drama would unfold. Max stayed perfectly calm at my feet, head resting on his paws, embodying more dignity than the woman towering over us. Karen, however, was in full meltdown mode. Her arms were crossed, her nose scrunched, and her tone made it clear she wasn't going to budge without a scene. The flight attendant returned with the supervisor, a tall man in a navy vest with a name badge that read Daniel. His polite smile didn't reach his eyes. He already knew he was walking into a headache. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, keeping his voice professional. Karen pounced before I could speak. "The issue," she said, loud enough for half the plane to hear, "is that this person thinks their mutt deserves a seat more than a paying customer. I paid for that seat, and I want it. This is outrageous." Daniel turned to me. "Sir, can you please show me your boarding pass and documentation for your service animal?" I handed everything over without hesitation. He looked it over, nodded, and handed it back. "Everything is in order. This gentleman is traveling with a service dog, which is fully permitted under federal law. The seat next to him is reserved for the animal's comfort and safety. Ma'am, I'll need you to take your assigned seat so we can continue boarding." Most people would have sighed, accepted defeat, and moved on. Not Karen. "This is discrimination," she screeched. "You're treating me like I don't matter. I have rights. That dog is taking away a seat that belongs to me." Passengers were groaning now, muttering things like, "Oh great, another one," and "Just sit down, lady." A mother a few rows back even clapped her hands over her child's ears. But Karen doubled down, pointing directly at Max. "Put the dog in cargo or I'm not moving." End of story. Cargo. She wanted my service dog, my medically trained, federally protected lifeline, shoved into the freezing, dangerous cargo hold like a suitcase. My patience snapped. I stood up, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, Max is a service dog. He's not cargo. He's not optional. You don't get to decide that. And if you can't follow the rules, maybe this flight isn't for you." Her jaw dropped as though I'd slapped her. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are? You don't talk to me like that." Daniel sighed, clearly trying to keep the situation from spiraling further. "Ma'am, if you don't comply with the seating arrangement, we will have to remove you from the aircraft. Those are the rules." Karen whipped around, her voice dripping with arrogance. "You can't remove me. I'll sue this airline for every penny. You're all violating my rights. I want to speak to the captain right now." The plane had gone dead silent. People were staring with wide eyes, whispering excitedly. It was like watching a live soap opera unfold before takeoff. And then, as if the universe itself had decided to teach Karen a lesson, the cockpit door opened. Out stepped Captain James Carter, my old friend from college. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore his uniform with the kind of presence that commanded instant respect. I hadn't even known he was flying this route until I saw him. He scanned the scene quickly, his eyes landing on me, then Max, then Karen. A flicker of recognition crossed his face as he spotted me. His lips twitched in a small, knowing smile. "What's the problem here?" he asked in a voice that was calm but carried authority. Karen spun toward him like he was her savior. "Finally. Someone in charge. Thank goodness you're here. These people are refusing to let me sit in my rightful seat because they think a dog deserves it more than me. I demand you order them to move that animal so I can sit where I paid to sit." For a moment, Captain Carter just looked at her. His expression didn't change, but the silence was heavy. Then, slowly, he turned to me. "Hey," he said, his tone softening. "Good to see you again. And Max. He's looking sharp as always." A ripple of confusion spread through the passengers. Karen blinked, clearly not expecting the captain to know me personally. "You know him?" she asked, her voice uncertain now. "Yes," Captain Carter replied smoothly. "He's an old friend of mine. And I also happen to know the law. His service dog is fully authorized to fly with him and occupy the space he needs. There is no negotiation here. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. But I paid for. The captain cut her off, his voice firmer this time. Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation. This dog is not a pet. He is a trained service animal. Federal regulations require us to accommodate him, and if you are unwilling to accept that, then you cannot remain on this flight. Gasps and whispers spread through the cabin. Some passengers even started smiling, clearly enjoying watching Karen finally get put in her place. Karen's face turned crimson. Are you threatening me? Captain Carter didn't blink. No, ma'am. I'm giving you a choice. Take your assigned seat elsewhere, or we'll have security escort you off the plane. Those are your only two options. For the first time, Karen hesitated. Her bravado cracked slightly under the weight of the captain's authority. But instead of backing down gracefully, she made one last desperate attempt. I'll have your job for this, she hissed. You'll regret humiliating me in front of everyone. The captain leaned in just slightly, his voice calm but final. Ma'am, I've been flying for 20 years, and I've seen just about everything. But if you think threatening me will change the law or override federal regulations, you're mistaken. Decide now, because we're not wasting more time. The entire cabin was silent, waiting. Max shifted slightly at my feet, sensing the tension but staying perfectly calm. Karen's eyes darted around, realizing every passenger was against her. No allies, no sympathy. Just dozens of people silently begging her to get off the plane. And deep down, I already knew how this was going to end. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for Karen's next move. Some passengers were leaning into the aisle just to catch every second of the showdown. Others were filming discreetly with their phones. No one wanted to miss what was clearly becoming a legendary airplane Karen moment. Karen's face was flushed, her jaw tight, and her fists clenched at her sides. She looked like a kettle about to explode. You can't do this to me, she finally shouted, her voice shrill. I paid good money for this flight. I'm not going anywhere until that mud is gone. I felt Max's head nudge against my leg, a subtle reminder of his training. He could sense my rising anxiety, grounding me in the middle of the chaos. I took a deep breath and patted his head. Meanwhile, Captain Carter didn't so much as flinch. Ma'am, he said with absolute calm, this is your last chance to cooperate. Either you sit in your assigned seat, or security will escort you off the plane. Those are the only two options left. Karen spun to face the passengers, as if rallying them to her cause. Are you all just going to sit there and let them throw me off for a dog? This is ridiculous. Who's with me? Her words hung in the air, but the silence that followed was deafening. Not a single hand went up. Instead, a man in the row across from me muttered, Lady, just sit down so we can take off already. A woman 2 rows back chimed in, Yeah, we all have places to be. You're the only problem here. Even the mother with her kids gave Karen a glare that could cut glass. Some of us are traveling with children. Please stop making this worse. Karen's face contorted with rage. Instead of humbling her, the passenger's rejection pushed her further into meltdown mode. This is harassment, she shrieked. You're all ganging up on me because I'm the only one with the guts to speak the truth. Dogs don't belong on planes. That was it, the breaking point. Captain Carter pulled out his radio and spoke with the practiced authority of someone who dealt with difficult passengers before. Ground security, we need an escort to gate 12. Removal of a non-compliant passenger. The effect was immediate. Murmurs filled the cabin as people realized Karen's fate was sealed. Karen, however, went from rage to panic in seconds. No, you can't. I have an important meeting. I can't miss this flight, she pleaded, her tone shifting from entitled to desperate. But it was too late. Within minutes, 2 uniformed airport security officers appeared at the cabin door. They moved with quiet efficiency, stepping into the aisle where Karen still stood like a stubborn statue. Ma'am, one officer said firmly, you've been asked multiple times to comply with crew instructions. You're being removed from this flight. Karen tried one last tactic, tears. Her voice cracked as she clutched her handbag dramatically. Please. I didn't mean it. I was just upset. I'll sit anywhere, I swear. Don't do this. The officers weren't moved. They'd heard it all before. One gently took her arm while the other blocked the aisle to prevent escape. "Ma'am, you need to come with us now." Her face twisted into disbelief. "You can't treat me like this. I'll sue every one of you." "I'll..." But her protests were cut short as the officers firmly guided her toward the exit. She twisted her neck to look back, her voice echoing through the cabin. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." The passengers erupted in applause the moment she stepped off the plane. Some even cheered, while others laughed in relief. A businessman near the back shouted, "Best in-flight entertainment I've ever had." I couldn't help but smile, the tension in my chest finally easing. Max let out a small huff, resting his chin back on his paws as if to say, "Crisis averted." Captain Carter looked at me and gave a subtle wink before turning back toward the cockpit. "All right, folks, sorry for the delay. We'll be on our way shortly." As the cabin door shut behind Karen and the officers, the mood shifted instantly. The atmosphere, once tense and hostile, was now buzzing with laughter and chatter. Strangers exchanged knowing smiles, united in the absurdity of what had just happened. The flight attendants moved quickly, finishing the boarding process with a newfound energy. One of them leaned down toward me and whispered, "Your dog's better behaved than half the passengers we see." I chuckled. He's had more training than most adults. When the last of the passengers were seated and the cabin settled, the plane finally began to taxi. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Karen on the tarmac, still gesturing wildly as security escorted her away from the gate. It was a sight I knew I'd never forget. But little did Karen know, her outburst wasn't just going to end with her missing this flight. The consequences were only beginning. With Karen gone, the plane felt like a completely different place. The tension had evaporated, replaced by relief and even a touch of camaraderie among the passengers. People were smiling, shaking their heads, and whispering about what they'd just witnessed. Some even joked that the airline should hand out free drinks after a show like that. Max settled back into his spot, calm as ever, his head resting against my leg. I stroked his fur, feeling my heartbeat slow. He had done his job without needing to move, just being there, steady and dependable, keeping me from unraveling in the middle of that storm. A flight attendant stopped by, crouched down, and gave Max an approving smile. "He's a star," she said softly. "Wish every passenger had his manners." I laughed. He deserves frequent flyer miles more than I do. As the plane rolled down the runway and lifted into the sky, I leaned back in my seat, finally able to breathe freely. The chaos was behind us, and the hum of the engines was oddly soothing. For once, I could just focus on the trip ahead instead of bracing for another confrontation. About halfway through the flight, Captain Carter himself made his way into the cabin. He paused beside my seat, flashing me that same easy grin I remembered from our college days. "Well," he said, "that's one way to start a shift." I chuckled. "You always did know how to make an entrance." He crouched slightly to give Max a friendly pat. "Still the best co-pilot you'll ever have, huh?" "Better than most," I agreed. The captain's expression grew a little more serious. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that. People like her, they think the rules don't apply to them. But you handled yourself well." "Thanks," I said. "Honestly, Max did most of the work just by being here. And you showing up at the right moment didn't hurt." Captain Carter winked. "Let's just say the timing worked out." Then, lowering his voice, he added, "By the way, she's not just missing this flight. Behavior like that gets reported. Chances are she'll be dealing with more than a delayed schedule." That caught my attention. "You mean?" He nodded. "The airline files incident reports when passengers are disruptive. With witnesses, video recordings, and a refusal to comply with crew instructions, she could face fines or even a ban from flying with this carrier for a while. And if she actually tries to sue like she threatened, she won't get far." The thought of Karen pacing angrily in some airport office while the rest of us soared through the sky was oddly satisfying. I couldn't help but smile. "Good," I said simply. After a few more words, Carter returned to the cockpit, and I leaned back, enjoying the rest of the flight in peace. The attendants brought drinks and snacks, passengers settled into movies or books, and the earlier drama became just a funny story for people to text their friends about. When we landed and began to disembark, Several passengers stopped to say something to me. "Your dog's amazing. You handled that really well. Glad she's not here ruining the rest of our day." Each comment was a reminder that most people weren't like Karen. Most people understood respect, compassion, and common sense. As Max and I walked through the terminal, I spotted her again, Karen, surrounded by two security officers, her face twisted with fury as she gestured wildly. Even from a distance, I could hear snippets of her ranting. Threats of lawsuits, demands for special treatment, claims of emotional distress. But the officers looked unimpressed. They stood firm, arms crossed, clearly used to this kind of behavior. Whatever Karen thought she was achieving, it wasn't working. I didn't linger. Max and I had somewhere to be, and frankly, I'd already given her enough of my time. But as I walked away, I couldn't help but think about the irony. She had tried to take away the seat meant for my service dog, and instead, she'd lost her own. In the end, it wasn't just about me or Max. It was about the principle. Service dogs aren't luxuries, they're necessities. They aren't pets, they're lifelines. And no amount of entitlement, no matter how loud, can erase the rights that protect them. As Max and I left the airport and stepped into the fresh air outside, I gave his leash a gentle tug and said, "Good boy. We did it." He wagged his tail, golden fur glinting in the sunlight, and trotted happily by my side. The world was full of Karens, but as long as I had Max and people like Captain Carter who understood the rules, I knew we'd always be okay.